So I'm so happy to have Naveen with us today. I'm Art Ocain, field CISO, vCISO, CISO, plus everything CIO related, it seems like, for our customers over at Airiam. And Naveen is chief architect at Horizon 3 and probably one of the most brilliant people you'll ever meet. So, really excited to have him on our webinar today, talking about really what a threat actor is able to do and what they see and kind of what you might see as they're coming into your network. All right, let's go to the first slide here. So I'm going to run through about us. We're going to do an attack simulation, which is probably the most exciting part of this, and the part that obviously Naveen put all the time and effort into. And then we'll have some discussion and some Q&A. So as questions come to mind, drop them in Q&A. Don't wait till the end. Load them in now. Love to see all the questions. We'll address them all at the end unless it makes sense for them to stop and hit them as we go. But yeah, we'll definitely answer your questions. So drop them in, and then we'll kind of run through some next steps and really what you should be doing next. Next slide. And I already introduced Naveen, chief architect at Horizon 3, and everybody knows me already. Uh, Loud and boisterous field CISO and CIO at Airiam. All right, let's go next.
Hey, I'll talk to this.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so Horizon 3, our company was founded about 3.5 years ago. And the premise of the company is to use offense to inform defense. So at a high level, I think everyone knows that there's an imbalance between attackers and defenders, right? So attackers only have to be right one time, and defenders have to be right all the time. And we know that the defensive tools, no matter how good you can get them, attackers still find a way to get around and do all sorts of damage. And so the premise of our company is to flip that script around and use offensive techniques to enable companies to build better defenses. So essentially letting people hack themselves using our product. So I've been with the company since the beginning. I'm part of the founding team and helped build out the pen test platform. And it's been a really fun ride.
Thanks, Naveen. Go to the next slide.
Yeah, so our product is Node Zero, which we offer as software as a service in the cloud. So anyone can sign up and begin hacking themselves. So basically using our platform to test their environments, test their security controls, and see what an attacker might do in their environments.
Awesome. All right, so let me introduce you to Airiam. So Airiam is a group of 5 companies, most of which are MSPs and MSSPs, but also some software development companies, a XDR platform, all combined to really make a resilience platform company that is IT and cybersecurity together. We have an incident response team, which is highly focused on ransomware incidents, and we, are focused on the ability of a company to bounce back from an incident, understanding that security incidents happen and products like Node Zero will help us identify them before they happen. But we need to be able to recover quickly after an incident and build those resilience paths. So our real ambitions are to offer the best IT management products and services, to build the best in class cybersecurity platform, and to create more value for businesses through resilience. Next slide. We've been featured in a lot of press, but and we also have offices, around the U.S. We have, from companies we've acquired, have been in Milwaukee, have been in Houston, Rockville, and Salisbury, Maryland, and Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. All right, Naveen, you want to run with this one?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's kind of a platitude at this point. Assume breach, right? We hear about it all the time. I would say probably maybe a decade ago, this kind of statement would be controversial. Um, but now, the trends are pretty obvious. It's kind of staring everyone in the face. Um, just recently, kind of the Move It hack, I think, is fresh in everyone's mind, and that led to latest reports, 340 organizations impacted, and that was exploited as a 0-day. And if you look at the statistics, this is from Rapid7 looking at 2022 vulnerability intelligence report. 43% of the widespread threats that they analyzed in that report began as a 0-day exploit. And of the 56% of the vulnerabilities in that report were also exploited within 7 days of public disclosure. So if you think about that, if you back up and think about that, and apparently the 43% of 0 days was actually down from the previous year, which was around 55%, probably because of the conflict in Ukraine and so forth. But nonetheless, what does that mean if you're trying to defend your networks, right? 43% of the time where something is exploited in the wild, if it's a 0-day, that means you have no chance of really defending your network. They're going to get initial access and then start moving around. So you have to be prepared to have defense in depth so that when an attacker breaks in, they're not able to maneuver around. And so that's really kind of the focus of today's demonstration is, in the news, you hear all the time about, okay, they exploited this vulnerability and got into the network. But you never hear curiously about what happens afterwards. How is it that they made their way through the network and then got to crown jewels, all sorts of personal information, credit card, whatever it is, right? And then leak all that stuff out there. How did that happen after initial access? And so that's kind of the focus of today's presentation.
Awesome. And something to keep in mind is, although we're kind of focusing on, using a vulnerability to get in, and using a 0-day, things like that, a lot of, most of the breaches that I'm doing ransomware recovery on are the result of phishing and somebody logging in. So, as easy as it is to use an exploit, and especially a known exploit, and get in, imagine just being able to log in with creds. So, and really have access to the entire network. All right, thanks, Naveen.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. We'll do a simulation. So in this simulation, I'm gonna show Node 0 in action with the lab network that I've set up, and showing kind of common techniques attackers might use on the inside. And really to kind of build a discussion around what are the things that companies need to do to protect themselves from these kind of attacks. All right. So I am in the Node 0 interface. So when you log in to our portal, you get dropped in, and then you have the option to basically kick off a pen test. And I'll walk through what that work looks like, and then I'll kick off the actual simulation and show you what that looks like. So when you enter our portal, you have a menu of options you can choose from. Run an internal pen test, external pen test, and so forth. For this, I'm just going to run a standard internal pen test. And what Node 0 will do, the way this works is that when this gets kicked off, we spin up command and control infrastructure in our cloud in a dedicated VPC. And then on the inside, this is an assumed breach scenario, you'll be running node 0, which is a Docker container. And that on the inside will connect up to our command and control infrastructure and then orchestrate a pen test. And so node 0 will start enumerating the network using kind of common tactics that pen testers and attackers use, and then go from there, finding vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, credentials, and chaining attacks, ultimately trying to get to crown jewels, compromising the domain and so forth. So I'm just setting up scope here. So this is the IP address range we'll be attacking. You can put in open source intelligence that node 0 will use for different types of attacks, like company names. Domains can be helpful for gathering a lot of open source intelligence that are used for different attacks. And we also support AWS enumeration as well. So if you put in specific account IDs, we can go after those. Although node 0 will also try to discover them on the network. And then we have a bunch of attack configuration flags you can set. This is a subset of everything node 0 does, but these are the ones we give you control over. And so for the purpose of today's simulation, I'm actually going to turn off a lot of the flags. I'm going to turn off a lot of the exploits. Turn off man-in-the-middle attacks. Some of you might be familiar with responder, LLM-NAR poisoning. I'm going to turn all of that off. We have a remote access tool as well. So certain vulnerabilities we exploit, we can install a remote access tool and then do further pivoting from there. The purpose of today, I'm going to turn that off as well. It's because I want to really focus on common tactics attackers use, living off the land, and kind of show what that looks like with most of the exploits turned off. Right, and so there's additional configuration here. And then at the end, you would go and then kick off the pen test. In the interest of time, I've already have a previous pen test that I kicked off, but I haven't actually started yet. When you do this, it takes about 5-6 minutes for infrastructure to spin up in the cloud and then start the orchestration process. So I short-circuited that by already starting one earlier on the top of the hour, so we don't have to wait for it. So this is the one I started just earlier. And so now when you want to actually run the pen test, you can copy this script onto your host. So again, this is on the inside. And this script will go ahead and install our node 0 Docker container, which will then connect up to the command and control infrastructure in the cloud. All right. So there it goes. And if you see it, you see our container is running. And so this is running on the inside in our cyber range and connecting up to command and control in the cloud. And then you can see it in action starting up from the logs. And then over here, when it officially kicks off, we have a real-time view that will show as it's beginning. And there it goes. It's starting up. So this will be streaming live as the simulation progresses. The actual cyber range environment is a small Windows-based environment. It's got about 7 machines, including domain controller and several domain join machines. So as it goes, we'll be able to see what exactly it's doing.
And I love this about Node Zero. It's a complete strength that we're able to see it as it goes and see what it's doing as it goes. So there's nothing really black box about it. It makes explaining what happened really easy.
Absolutely. So you can see the first thing it was doing was host discovery. And what does that look like? Well, that's an nmap command, right?
Mhm.
And so it's running nmap on the network to discover hosts. And it's kind of a normal first action that pen testers might take on the network in an internal pen test is find all the hosts in the network. So in this test, Node Zero is not starting with any privileges. There are no credentials or anything. So it's going to try to get initial access on the domain and then ultimately take over the domain. So it ran 3 nmap commands trying to find hosts in the network. And you can see over here, we'll start showing results.
And this is the same kind of surveillance that a attacker is going to do when they first gain access to your network too. So there's nothing that Node Zero is really doing that is not a normal attacker technique.
Yeah, these are all standard pen tester and attacker techniques using nmap. Like the container itself, Node Zero, is bundling. So it's based on Kali Linux, and it's bundling a lot of tools that everyone in the offensive security community is already using. All right, so it's getting busy now. uh, so so it found hosts, as you can see, 7 hosts on the network, and it's continuing to enumerate. So after finding hosts, kind of the normal procedure is to run port scans, see what ports are open, and then service enumeration, try to fingerprint what those services are, and then start, doing specific things against those services. So for instance, if it's a SMB service 445, there's tons of common exploits and so forth that attackers can start looking for, like eternal blue and so forth. And so that's what it's working through. If there are web ports, then scanning for common web vulnerabilities and so forth. So it reported one event here. Let's see what that is. 5 potential users from enumerating a Jenkins server. So Jenkins is a source control build management tool. So it's a build management tool used by a lot of technology companies. And it said that it found 5 users on the Jenkins server. So let's see what that looks like. So this is the Jenkins server in the cyber range. And so these are some users that it found on the network. And so what people don't realize is that usernames are very easy to find. OSINT and breach data internally, if you've got misconfigurations like this with Jenkins, where if you have anonymous read access, for instance, then all the users, if they're Active Directory joined, you can just basically dump them out. And so there's, I don't know, probably dozens of ways to get usernames. And so we'll see how that comes into play in this attack. All right, it looks like it found a domain controller. Now it's starting to do some domain controller enumeration. This specific event here is related to, it's a different version of Kerberoasting where you can dump hashes for users if they have a specific flag set in Active Directory. So it's called pre-authentication disabled. Every now and then we see that companies have this set up for certain reasons. And it's a little bit dangerous because as an attacker, you can just dump password hashes and then crack those and then try to get access as a domain user. All right, it's moving forward. So it said it successfully sprayed a password for domain user Ocain.
I must use that same password again. Darn it.
That's your account, Art. Let's
Yep.
see. So it managed to use these usernames and then basically gets a password for Art. And obviously I set this up. So I know this password is summer1 star, summer1 exclamation mark. And so it's a simple technique, is just I find usernames and I'm just going to guess their passwords. And, you know, this obviously seems contrived because it's a simulation, but this works all the time in real environments, believe it or not. If you get a large enough base of usernames and then you start just guessing passwords, you are going to land on a user eventually. Sometimes it's immediately, sometimes it can take, a day, but chances are it will happen. So after finding a username, guessing the password for Art's account, we logged in as a domain user. So now we have initial access to the domain. And so then what happens next? So common attacker tactic, what does Art have access to in the domain? And Node Zero here discovers that Art is a local admin on a machine. Again, very common. Having domain users with local admin rights on some machines in the network is extremely common. So in this case, yep. So Node Zero identified it as domain local admin rights. And then following up on that, because Art is effectively administrator on this machine, it starts dumping credentials from that box. So it dumped the SAM database, which is a security account manager database. So this is NTLM hashes for all local users on this machine. So in this case, Art has basically fully compromised this machine, and it's continuing to work. So now it's got the administrator hash, and it's able to pass the hash and then log into that machine again, dumping more secrets using Art's account. So this is the same machine that Art had local admin rights to, 10.0.11.130. And it's going real fast. So now using that administrator credential that it dumped, Node Zero was able to pivot to another box. So the way this works is a lot of environments have local admin accounts that are the same across many machines in the network. And so once you're able to get initial access on one machine, if you have admin rights and you can grab the administrator NTLM hash, you basically can own a bunch of machines in the network just from one machine. And so Node Zero is pivoting with that administrator credential to other machines in the network, and then kind of the process repeats. So now here it's logged in as local administrator on other boxes in the range.
Even different usernames.
Yep, even different, because there's multiple local admins in this environment. So it's dumping them all. So now you're dumping secrets from security account manager database, LSA secret. There's like all sorts of techniques around OS credential dumping. And so Node Zero will harvest all those credentials just like an attacker would, and then try to use them everywhere in the network, and continue pivoting, because the ultimate goal is to compromise the domain, right? That's the first step to doing anything really malicious afterwards, because that gets you to own as many machines as possible. All right, so it's continuing to dump credentials. So this is a third box in the range. It also, as part of that, found some more domain user accounts. These are machine accounts that it was dumping for. And then here on this specific machine, it was actually able to dump LSAS as well. And LSAS memory is highly targeted by attackers because it often has NTLM hashes or clear text credentials for privileged accounts if you find the right machines. And so here, it managed to find from LSAS the account for a domain admin. And so using that domain admin account, it then logs into the domain. So at this point, node 0 has, what is it? We're 11 minutes in, gone from 0, right? It started at nothing really on the network, got initial access, pivoted to multiple boxes, dumped a domain administrator credential, and now owns this little cyber range domain. So it's going to continue. It'll start pilfering data. It'll start looking through, okay, I got all these users. What data do they actually have access to? And then can I do something with that data? So as this progresses, you'll see it do more things. So here, now that it got domain admin, it is able to do a DC sync operation and then pull all credentials from the domain controller for domain users. And so that means it has all accounts for domain users tied to that domain. And it's able to crack some of those credentials as well.
And this is all without using any malware. This is all just using basically Windows system commands against, Windows. What is the effectiveness of security software in identifying any of this?
Surprisingly, even though all these techniques are kind of living off the land, they're like well known in the community and well known by EDR vendors and so forth. Time and time again, they work in environments. So I think there's a mismatch in terms of what maybe 95% of companies actually are running and deploying versus the 1 to 5%, like the Fortune 100, 500, and what they're running, those tools. Most of the time, these simple techniques work, and it's very surprising, but most of these things don't get blocked in a lot of environments. And they're very simple, well-known techniques that are out there and have been out there for a long time. And so I think that's why as an industry, we really need to bridge that divide between attackers and defenders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know whenever I run Node 0 on a client environment, even ones that I would consider well patched, well managed, things like that, it is usually able to do similar tactics and get around the network. So, even ones that are well protected. So it definitely is it does bring light to a problem.
For sure. So it's going to continue looking for data in the network. I actually, in this scenario, planted an AWS access key in the environment. So eventually it's going to find it in a share. And then it'll start being able to use that to pivot into AWS infrastructure as well. And the reason for that is really that, again, it happens all the time in production environments. So even though this is a simulation, pilfering data and pivoting into other environments, starting from an internal environment, going to AWS, it's very common, right? How do you get initial access to the cloud? I guarantee it's not from hacking AWS unless you're a nation state, right? It's, really because you find access keys lying around somewhere, either an insider or you've compromise something else on the inside, and then you can pivot into the cloud. So let me back out of this. And I just showed you kind of an attack path. And I'm going to show like, this is a prior run, and I'll show you actually what it looks like when you get the final report, right? So this is domain compromise. And so in the report that you'd get back, you could see node 0 got to domain compromise. And these are all the different things it was able to leverage to get to domain compromise. So unauthenticated access to Jenkins to dump usernames. Then pivoting with that to password spray and get into Art's account. And then dumping security account manager database, pivoting with local admin credentials, and dumping LSAS. So if you go into the impact itself, there's a clean narrative of everything that node 0 just executed. So this is a prior test I ran. The report's already here, but this is exactly what just took place. So if you look at the chain of events, right? So it starts with enumerating usernames from Jenkins, verifies those usernames, and then it conducts a password spray and discovers Art's account. Finds that Art is a local admin on a box, and it's then able to dump the security account manager using Art's credential on that box. From there, it discovers a local admin credential, so in this case, CBR user, and it pivots to another machine. So Art was local admin on the 130 box, then it moved to the 129 box using a different local admin credential. And then on this other box, it dumped LSAS and got the domain admin credential, and here it is. And so that's the full chain of events that are captured here.
Now, in this attack, you went through Jenkins, which is not every environment has Jenkins, but you also turned off most of the vulnerability,
Yeah.
attacks at the beginning of the attack. What I want to like reiterate to everybody who's kind of watching is that when Naveen turned off all those check marks for almost every kind of attack on this network, if he'd left those on, there'd probably be a lot more. And on networks, especially whether you have 10 computers or 600, there's always vulnerabilities, there's always something to hack, and node 0 will come up with a path through your network. If you have Jenkins, it might be using a Jenkins exploit, but if you have a machine that has RDP services running, if you have any other service, it will find a way. And that is really what an attacker is doing, what a threat actor is doing when they're when they have their eyes on you. They're looking for a way, and the more assets you have, the harder it is to protect them all. So there's always something that's open.
Definitely. Yeah. So in this case, Jenkins was the source of usernames, and username enumeration vulnerabilities aren't really taken that seriously. They're considered kind of a low or medium level vulnerability. In this case, that happens to be what node 0 used. But there are so many ways for attackers to discover usernames and then verify those usernames. So against Active Directory, there are specific attacks you can run with a list of usernames to tell if they're real or not. And then once you know which ones are real, you can start really spraying passwords and guessing and then pivoting with them. Let's see.
And something that a normal threat actor uses a lot more than what node 0 uses is open source intelligence. You can go on Zoom Info and find out somebody's email address, and the starting of somebody's email address is probably their username. So that kind of thing to give yourself a starting point when you're a threat actor is not hard to do. So here we're using Jenkins, but in real life it could be anything. It's not hard to deduct a username.
Yep. Yep. Now let me show another path in this environment that will eventually hit in the simulation. So this was using Art's account to find an open file share. And in there, there's an AWS key. And then from there, it got initial access to the AWS environment. So very similar attack sequence here. So once we have access as Art, we can then start looking for file shares around the network that Art has access to. In this case, we found a file share and it's got AWS credentials in them. And then we're able to log into AWS as a specific user. Yeah, this is very common. A lot of companies have large file shares, NFS, SMB, that, maybe it's not anonymous access, but if you have any credential, like a domain user, then you can get access to lots and lots of data, and then use that to pivot around and do damage.
Yeah, I can't think of many business networks, regardless of the size of the enterprise, that don't have some kind of public share that is, available to all domain users, all authenticated users, that kind of thing.
Awesome. Let's see. So in the interest of time, why don't we switch back to the other slides, and this will continue on in the background.
Awesome. Great. And I know that we, refer to Node Zero as pen testing a lot. I call it a lot, security testing or autonomous security testing. I know there's a lot of discussion around that, but what to actually name it. But what I'd like to just kind of reiterate is I don't really care what it's called. As far as what category we want to call it, it is for any kind of company that's making frequent changes in their network or has a managed service provider making frequent changes. Something like this is like we use it on our clients because it's always turning up something we didn't realize, and that kind of security validation is important to us. But um, when you just see what Naveen did and you see how easy it was for in what 11 minutes for it to completely own a domain, that's a threat actor can do that as well. And while especially one that has, if you have any intelligence about the company at all, it might even be quicker. Whereas Node Zero is really running without any kind of former knowledge about the network. So, yeah, it definitely is a good simulation of what a threat actor would see.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you look at the kind of the key takeaways that I've got here. So speed, right? Like think about this. It took 11 minutes in this simulation for Node Zero to get to domain admin. In production networks, the fastest we've gotten domain admin is 4 minutes. Starting with nothing, no report, no credentials at all, just unauthenticated on the network, 4 minutes got domain admin. And these are real production live networks. They're not like lab environments or anything like that. And it makes you rethink, what does that mean in terms of defense, right? And some of these tactics are pretty loud, but if you can execute them really fast and take over the network, does it really matter? Like,
Mhm.
if you're not set up to prevent and block a lot of these things, you're just set in detection mode. By the time you react, it's kind of over, right? And so you have to really think about how to reorient your defenses more around prevention, proactively shutting down vectors beforehand. And the stuff I showed here in this simulation, it's not very exotic. Like, we do have pretty awesome exploits. We can implant and pivot from there. But kind of the basics living off the land work and are very effective in a lot of environments. And this is why threat actors can do a lot of damage, because even though they're very simple, right? We're guessing passwords, we're looking in file shares, we're taking the privileges we're given and just abusing them, looking at credential reuse, we're dumping credentials. Like, all of these things are pretty stupid tactics, but they work. And they're timeless, right? It's not like I got the vulnerability on the network, I'm going to patch it and that problem goes away. These problems are there forever because they rely on humans at the end of the day. So password policy, how people manage their data and put them in the network, privileges, like those are much harder problems to solve than, hey, I got these vulnerabilities I need to patch on these machines. Everyone knows, hey, I got zero logon domain control, I'm going to patch that right away, right? How do you fix your credential policy and make sure you're adhering to least privilege, or make sure that all the data in your network's actually only accessible to people who should have access to it? These are hard problems to solve, but these exactly why attackers are able to exploit them and make gold out of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like. There's two things you kind of really said here. Is well, one, the speed problem. Um, even if you have a SOC, um, you have a SOC, they're seeing, they're getting alerts in the SIM from privilege escalation. They're getting, seeing lateral movement. There may be something that is, their SOAR may be, or their SIM may be correlating that data and showing the SOC that, hey, there's something going on here. Somebody just pivoted from machine to machine after doing privilege escalation. Maybe it's something our threat hunters should look into. Maybe it's something we should investigate. But 4 hours later, by the time they've motivated that threat hunter, looked at what's happening, maybe fired up the IR team, like the entire domain's been owned, your data's been exfiltrated, and there's already there's already larger threats on your network by the time they're able to actually do anything. And what Naveen was saying with that credential problem is, at this point we're not even talking about vulnerabilities. We're not talking about really malware or anything else. Also, we're just talking about credentials. And the fact that, if you sign in as a domain user, not an admin, onto any domain, you have access to certain things on the network. And on most networks, you have access to more than you really need access to. If you think about your executives, I know a lot of companies where I've dealt with, executive privilege, where they just like, okay, I'm the CEO or I'm the COO, I should have access to everything on the network. I should have access. Do you really need access to everything on the network? And people that, especially admins, do you really need access to all these things? And the answer is no. But going to that least privilege or that zero trust mentality is a lot of work. It's cultural work within your company to get people to let go of access that they don't really need. But it's also a lot of like auditing and figuring out and reconfiguring everything. Saying, okay, the sales guys really only need access to the sales folder. They don't need the engineering folder. They don't need the finance, and just segmenting that so that the impact when that threat actor is successful in the network, now they're only able to access the sales folder, that kind of thing. When the threat actor is able to compromise that person's creds, they only have access to the small, blast radius of what that person had access to. Awesome. All right, next
Just want to
slide.
say that Node Zero did get to those access keys.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the kind of the issues. I know how much time do we want for Q&A?
I think if we can breeze through these and get to Q&A, it looks like we have a couple questions. So yeah, I think if we can spend about 10 minutes on Q&A, we're probably good.
All right. Yeah, let's breeze through these, right? So I'll talk about some of the issues that you just saw that Node Zero exploited in this simulation, and just kind of quickly talk through kind of these are big discussion points for any organization, right? But I'm just going to talk through them really quickly. So password policy, right? So everyone knows about MFA for external endpoints. On the inside, MFA is not really going to do much because attackers have so many ways to use credentials without MFA. So SMB, WMI, RPC. There's all these protocols out there that they're just there in the network and Windows environments that don't have MFA. And so it really then comes down to how are you protecting your passwords? Or do you, kind of really forward-looking enterprises are moving to passwordless and so forth. But again, we're talking about the 99%. This is still in play all the time. And so how guessable are your employees' passwords is a big question. So can an attacker just, spray summer 1 star across all of your users and then land on one? Password rotation, like the latest NIST guidance actually says, don't rotate, don't enforce password rotation. Why? Because it leads to users creating predictable passwords. So you go from summer 2023 to fall 2023 to winter 2023, and rotation has actually been shown to link to that kind of behavior and make it more predictable in a kind of ironic way. So that's something to consider. And password length, right? So at this point, if you have a 8-character password, there are NTLM rainbow tables that will map to every single 8-character password out there. So we recommend going to a 12-character minimum, so that even if someone gets your NTLM hash, it becomes very hard to crack at that character limit. So again, a lot of companies also have common company passwords that are shared, right? So a new employee onboards. What is their password? Is it temp1234 or something like that? Then, again, attackers are going to know that these things are out there and then start spraying that across lots of users. So password policy is hard, but it's really important to manage.
Absolutely.
Go to the next slide. Least privilege, we talked about this a little bit. Like, I'll give an example here. Like when Uber was hacked, I think last year by Lapsus, how did they pivot into AWS? Because this is exactly what we just showed in the simulation, is they found PowerShell scripts just lying in a network share, and they had AWS keys in them. That's how they pivoted into AWS. Like, these are common problems that all companies have in terms of data management and who has access to data. You can go to the next slide. Credential dumping, big topic, right? So on a Windows system, there's so many places where credentials are stored. So in the OS itself, you get security account manager database, LSA secrets, LSAS, then user secrets protected by DPAPI. Like, there's endless number of ways to get credentials on a Windows system. And really, you need to understand, is your EDR blocking all these attempts to dump credentials? Because really, there's no good reason for anyone to do this other than an attacker trying to, do something bad to your system. But a lot of times we find simple techniques that are well known work out of the box, regardless of the EDR. So LSAS, everyone focuses on LSAS because that's important and kind of easy access. But SAM database, LSA secrets still have valuable secrets that Node Zero and other attackers are able to use. And what's the final slide here? Local admin management. So we see a lot of environments where you compromise one machine, you get local admin, then you can pivot to other machines in the network. So it's effectively the same as domain compromise if you have the same local admin cred everywhere. Now, if you got one user who's a domain user who's also local admin, then you've effectively given that domain user local admin rights to everything in the network. And basically, they're kind of a shadow domain admin in a way. And so there are techniques to solve this, right? You can disable local admins, you can use laps. There are well-known ways to do it. But these are real challenges that need to be thought through and implemented.
Awesome. Let me run through some of the questions. I already answered a couple via keyboard. And one significant one that I just want to kind of read out was, how noisy is Node Zero in terms of EDR and IDS detection? I already answered this one via text here, but really my answer was, if EDR allows privilege escalation, it won't stop it. And sometimes that's configuration, but I know most EDR, we're partners with most name brand EDR companies over here at Airiam. And, when we install them, they still allow you to, UAC, privilege escalate, you get run as admin, stuff like that, in order to do administrative tasks on a machine that are normal. So, EDR usually doesn't stop that unless it's configurable to stop that. However, as far as how noisy it is, it usually does log an entry. But the thing is, that doesn't matter if nobody's looking at it. And, those, if you have a SIM, SOAR, XDR solution type thing, and it's gathering those logs about, a privilege escalation happening, is that going to be significant to the SOC or whoever's looking at those logs when they're looking at a million other log entries? Like, is that something that's actually going to catch them? So, yeah. All right. So,
I would
go
add
ahead, Naveen.
from this personal observations across a lot of client networks that certain actions like dumping SAM and LSA are almost never blocked. Node Zero is able to, if you got admin on a box, you're able to dump local hashes. LSA, like LSAS, is blocked sometimes. So it goes back to that point. Like, even if you're detecting it and raising an alert, doesn't matter, because an attacker can just take those spreads and breeze through the network really fast by the time you're catching up to your alerts.
Hmm. Yep. All right, Patrick had a question here. Would Horizon 3 consider having a lab for their resellers to demonstrate to potential clients? So a cyber range to do this kind of demo for clients. And I don't know if that's a you question or more of an Ann question or something like that, but
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Anne. We'll take it offline and we'll
oh,
connect. Uh,
okay.
that's a good question. Something we've been thinking about also.
Yep. And Patrick also asked, will at some stage you be able to use OSINT information? So if you know some information, you want to provide it to Node Zero, will, are you building in that capability at all?
Yeah, so we do have some OSINT capabilities. So I didn't set it up in this test, but like if you put in domain names, company names,
Okay.
Node Zero will try to discover OSINT information that's linked to those domains,
Awesome.
company names. So for instance, if you put in a company name, it'll go and try to discover using LinkedIn who are all the users tied to this company. If you put in domains, it'll try to figure out, okay, these domains appeared in the breach data that we have. So we have dark web data. We can try to figure out, okay, who are users there? What are their passwords? And then use that to help crack passwords and so forth. So we are not OSINT blind. We actually make, if you do configure certain aspects, we will go use that in the test.
Awesome. As far as redaction of exploited creds, um, I think Patrick here is asking about those credentials, or how can we assure new users or clients that we're not exposing any of that stuff? Is that being stored in Node Zero anywhere? Is that accessible, the creds that are cracked or harvested, um, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously security is something we take very seriously. So the way we designed our platform from the get-go is that a pen test is spun up in a private dedicated network. And that's where the command and control happens. And then it communicates to Node Zero. And so that's all isolated while the pen test is happening. So while that's happening, that dedicated network does have access to credentials. But then once the pen test is complete, all that data is thrown away and only the stuff that you see in the report is preserved. So all the credentials, we don't store them at all. So they are basically star them out, and then that's what you see in the portal. So no sensitive information is retained in any persistent fashion. It's only during the course of the pen test in that private network that we have access.
Awesome. And Patrick asked also if there's any usage of AI or ML in this process at all.
There is some usage of AI and ML. It's not, I wouldn't say it's heavy.
Mhm.
Um, Really, what we're focused on is not exactly like what method of AI we're using. Is it deep learning? Is it LLMs? All that stuff, right? It's ultimately about the outcome. And so our outcome is to emulate what a manual pen tester would actually try to do, right? So if they discover certain things, what are the next set of actions they're going to take, and kind of going from that perspective. And so that can be thought of as AI, but we do have some machine learning, but to me, it's really about the outcome and what are we accomplishing versus the method that we're using.
Gotcha. Corey's question here is what happens if you stop the pen test in the middle and fix the problem? Um, you know, Corey, I think it's discovered all of that information already. So I think probably good to restart the pen test rather than start it, uh, that kind of thing, rather than fix a problem midway. Um, and you also asked, how long does it take to do a full pen test on a slash 24? Corey, from experience, that really depends on what machines are there and what services are on that. Because Node Zero is going to take time to exploit what it sees. So if there's a bunch of services that are exploitable, it might take a long time. I've seen it take a while, several hours to go through a network and try everything that it finds. But when you don't have a lot of exploitable vulnerabilities on that network, uh, you know, I'm seeing like 45 seconds per IP, that kind of thing. Naveen, you have anything to say there?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like you said, it really depends on what Node Zero finds. And so what causes it to take a lot of time is if it's finding a lot of stuff on the network. So if, especially credentials. So if it's able to get access to some credentials, then it's going to try to reuse those credentials everywhere, and pivot with credentials in all sorts of ways. And that usually in networks that Node Zero is able to get initial access, then it's able to go really far. And that can take some time. But again, you can always see what's happening and choose to end the pen test whenever you want to end it.
All right, and let's do one more question because we're running out against time here. But um, Calvin asked, not sure if I missed it, but did you touch on one-click verify?
I did not, but I can touch on it really quickly. So after you run a pen test, one of the things you can do is, let's say, you Node Zero identifies which weaknesses you should fix. And the way Node Zero prioritizes weaknesses is by the actual impact. So what attack path was that weakness involved in? And so then if you want to go fix that weakness in the interface, you can click a button, one click verify. And then you can run a dedicated test just to verify that you've actually fixed that weakness. So after you've sent it off to whoever needs to fix the issue, um, later on, if you want to retest, you don't have to run a full pen test. You can just do a one-click verify test targeted to that specific host and ensure that it's been fixed.
Awesome, and that's an awesome feature. Thanks everybody for your questions. Do we have any more slides in here? I think there's a next step here to show people. Yep, go on. All right, so obviously we love Node Zero. We love Horizon 3 here at Airiam. So, we're keen to show it off to anybody who wants to see it. So if anybody needs a pen test done with it, reach out. And if you're interested in getting a trial of Node Zero, reach out. We're here for you to get that started. So there's a link here for a trial of Node Zero, and use it. It's a powerful tool. There's no reason to not at this point. All right, and Airiam has a couple more webinars coming up. We've been shouting out about on LinkedIn, so please check out our compliance webinars coming up. We have one on SOC 2 and ISO, and one on NIST. All right, and this threat actors webinar series, we talked about really what threat actor is doing, and in the future webinars here in the threat actor series, we're going to be talking about how to defend live against an attack, what the IR looks like, and what the recovery looks like for these attacks. Awesome. And we have some other webinars coming in, cyber resilience webinar, and really a webinar about AI, which is going to be really interesting. We have some AI experts that are going to be on, so definitely sign up for that one. All right. Now, thank you everybody for attending, and thank you, Naveen. I know this was a lot of work for you to put this together, and you're a very high value person. So this amount of time you've invested in us all in this webinar is impressive. Thank you so much. This is awesome.
Thank you, Art. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you everybody for coming.